Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today we're going to talk about the Norwalk River in New England, Connecticut to be more exact, and the Indians, or the natives rather, that occupied the area around the 1500s when the Dutch settlers and the Puritans and stuff were running shit. They found an old Native American fort in the New England area, and a lot of the stuff gets uncovered from time to time. Like they'll find tools, or they'll find maybe small buildings, makeshift trading posts and arrowheads and stuff like that. But this one's actually really important because it's an actual fortress. So we're gonna go over some of the logistics of everything, like where it was located, how they found it, and what it means in the future. So first of all, there's a lot of stuff that is out there that is just laying there in the East Coast, actually all over America, and no one really bothers to look or find it. The only people who are going into the backcountry and other parts of the country are either hobbyists who have the time and resources to do so, which is a very, very, very small amount of people, or people who are hired out by museums or universities doing research. That's it. No one else is looking for this stuff. So it's not surprising that there's a lot of stuff out there that has either been recently found or has not been found. So something like a fort like this, and one of the artifacts that they found in there, which predates the fortress itself, they're just out there laying there, and this kind of is live proof that more people ought to be looking for this stuff if we hold American history and or the history of this continent with some sort of value. This article comes from, I think, Smithsonian. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, then excuse what I just said. Let's just get started. So 1600s Native American fort uncovered as part of a rail bridge replacement project is shining some light on the tribe's first dealings with Europeans. Okay, so they found this because no one was really looking for it. They had to basically follow code and rebuild this bridge, this really old bridge that keeps breaking, which is another thing that we can add to the list. Hobbyists, scientists, people hired out by the government, and builders who need to follow code, and engineers, they just stumble upon these treasures. The experts, they found the remains of the 17th century fort, but they also discovered artifacts including arrow and spear tips that date back an estimated 3,000 years. If they are indeed 3,000 years old, then one, that means Native Americans were active around that area and were making weapons 1000 AD or 1000 BC onwards. So they were there for a while. And number two, this kind of gives a great snapshot into how what life must have been like back then. Because when, at least for me in grade school, when we were learning about early Americans and the settlers, like it was like a party. Like they just showed up, and they had Thanksgiving with the locals, like the Iroquois Indians and the Algonquin Indians, and they just were cool with living off the land and settling towns like Jamestown and living their puritanical lives there. But really, it must have been more hostile. And there's no... What else does that say about a fortress being there? I mean, there's a fortress. I don't know. It's kind of giving you more dimensions and a higher resolution snapshot of what it was like. And then another thing is they didn't find any human remains. So these are either had been cleared out already in the past that we didn't, years and years prior, that we don't know about, or we just haven't. This is what Ross Harper says, who's the lead archaeologist in charge of cleaning this whole area up of artifacts. He says it's one of the earliest historic period sites that has been found so far. It's very rich in artifacts, including Native American pottery and stone tools, as well as trade goods such as glass beads, shell beads, hatchets, and knives. It's definitely one of the more important sites, not just for the area, but New England in general. So New England is a really interesting part of America because it was there before America even started. I mean, they were part of the 13 colonies, but they were colonies. They were colonial England at the time. They weren't. This is way before the Revolution and George Washington. So the way they lived, you could get a lot of artifacts from that era and really get some hard evidence that you can interpret the lives of those people back then. So the shelf was made of wooden walls, and the reason why they think that is because they found these wooden post holes they found these post holes where wooden vertical pieces of wood, basically like these poles, would be placed there. So they found all these sockets, basically. He said it appears that the Norwalk Indians, a tribe that historians know little about, had a fort at the site from about 1615 to 1640 and used it to trade goods with early Dutch settlers. Okay, so at the time, the Dutch were one of the first people to immigrate over from Europe to America just for opportunity and stuff like that. They were the tip of the spear of the West, so to speak, and they dealt with these natives. So the natives, they must have been dealing with them so often that they decided to be a good idea to create a trading post / fortress. Again, yeah, the way people who are familiar with the history, once you read enough on the history, you start to think about it in a different way. So some people read, oh, there was a fortress here, and then that's the end of it. But then other people will think, okay, there's a fortress here, but let's look underneath the glacier. Let's look underneath the water for a second. What had to have happened leading up to the construction of that fortress? And a lot of stuff must have happened. The fact that it's half trading post is pretty telling, because these people were on their guard, yet they were familiar enough with the Dutch that they were willing to trade with them. Or they didn't really have any choice and they traded with them anyway. So the actual site itself is on a small sliver of land next to railroad tracks. So I think on Google Earth it's like around here. This land right here juts out into the river, and this is a suspension bridge that keeps breaking, and that's what they're trying to repair, basically. And if you zoom out a little bit, you can see it goes into this harbor here and out into the Atlantic. This whole port must have been really important at that time. And you can see as you go up, I mean, there's New Haven, and then there's New London, and then all the way up to Bedford, and then Providence. All this area of New England is really important stuff. Here's how they found the actual fortress. So they were doing preliminary archaeological surveys, which is standard when you try to replace something as big as a 122-year-old bridge. You need to do surveys and to make sure everything gets the green light, so everything's safe and on the up and up. They found all this stuff while basically digging under and making sure that it's fine and the government passes it. So once they did that, they found these artifacts. So from there, a group called the Archaeological and Historical Services Incorporated, which is a firm, they're in charge of removing all the artifacts from the site and preserving them and to clean, and then and from there they go to museums where they keep them. I'm not sure exactly, but they clean them and they're preserved for further study, and then they write a report on everything they find. So they're kind of like the cleanup crew. They're trying to get all the artifacts out so they don't destroy anything, and from there they get the green light from the government to build the bridge. By the way, if you're a person interested in going to these digs and maybe volunteering or interning or something, a firm like this is a good place to look, because I would imagine they're looking for a lot of volunteers, and it's a good way to get hands-on experience of dealing with artifacts, how they care for them and preserve them, and like the whole shebaz with the order of operations and how to go about extracting these things from the earth. If you live in New England, if you live in Connecticut and you're interested, I would probably look that up. So this group has also been working with some other local natives, the Mashantucket Pequots and the Mohegans. They issued a joint statement on the project. They say that Utmost sensitivity should be used. They take the matter seriously, and both tribes have actively been working with people on the ground there for over a year to offer their expertise. So these native groups, they are very into preserving their history. They're also a really important resource in confirming the authenticity of stuff, maybe some translations, and preserving their language and their knowledge base. And that's part of preserving, because their history is part of American history as well. So it's really important that people raise awareness and they do everything they can to kind of back them up, in a sense. And here's something interesting. The site is one of only about a half dozen in the Northeast known to have contained evidence of Native Americans' first encounters with Europeans, and most of the sites have been destroyed or removed during development of the lands. Yeah, in the early days when the American settlers were establishing their buildings and such, they didn't think about this type of thing. They weren't thinking ahead this far. They just saw whatever they found and just tossed them out, or built over them with no regard. There was none of this ever occurred to them. There was no preserving anything, which is really sad. But I still maintain what I said earlier in this video, that there's still, despite all that, there's still a lot of stuff out there. I mean, we're talking about millennia of people living in that area. You're not going to get rid of everything just by settling a few hundred years here. There's still a lot of stuff. So 20 archaeologists were attracted to this find, despite the weather. Kevin McBride, one of the professors from UConn, he says it's a gold mine, and I happen to agree with him. The reason the site is so important is that there's a lot of material here. It's definitely one of the most important sites we found in a long time. I mean, they found a 3,000-year-old spearhead. That's just a spearhead. There's probably all kinds of stuff out there. If you guys have read about, there are legends. There have been legends for some time that the Proto-Celtic people came and traded with the Indians, and then the Vikings obviously came in and traded with them and interacted with them. You know, who knows what else was going on out there. I mean, it's all a mystery. Just earlier today, I was reading about in Ohio, they have the Serpent Mound, and Lord knows how long that's been there. So there's a lot of mystery that people don't even think about. There's also the red giant cave in North America and stuff. Some people think that's a hoax. Some people swear that there's some credence there. Either way, this whole continent is shrouded in mystery, and there's a lot to be explored. And people who say that everything's been found or everything's gone or there's no point, I think they need to read a couple of books, to be honest, to really open their eyes. And I don't fault them for thinking that. It's just a lot of stuff flies under the radar, and there are a lot of I don't want to say red flags, but there are a lot of hints and let's just call it flags. There are a lot of flags out there that indicate there's a lot of stuff underneath the surface here that we should look at. And then Professor McBride, and I agree with him when he says insight into Native Americans' first interactions with Europeans are found from these items, and they show how they incorporated European products such as iron, tools, and knives into their culture. So the natives weren't stupid. If they saw something valuable, they used it. And iron and especially knives were supplanting their stone tools, their stone arrowheads and such. The fact that they possessed both of these in their inventory, their collective inventory, really does shine a light on that transition period between of being westernized. And this is as early as the early 1600s. So a lot of people before all this came out, they thought that the natives were completely uncompliant, which there were we're talking about a diverse tribe of people here. So there are going to be some tribes who have certain opinions and have certain stances, but there were others who were a lot less violent, who were open to commerce and trade and commerce, like these natives were, as evidenced by this fort. So now there's hard evidence. It's not speculation anymore. So let me know what you guys think. If you guys are from the Midwest or New England area, have you guys found anything? I know a lot of people who have come from there, and they tell me when they were kids, poking around in their backyard or whatnot, they find arrowheads all the time, and I love hearing those stories. So if you guys have found any like currency, even gold, a fossil maybe, let me know in the comments. And if you have photos, that'd be even awesome, even more awesome. And that should do it. I'll see you guys tomorrow.